All right, so for those of you familiar with some type of version control system, most of you might be coming from Subversion or SVN. Some of you might be from other. Some of you may never have even heard of version control, and this is the first time you're introduced to it. Um, One thing you do need to know is that most version controls, and those of you coming from SVN, use a two-tree architecture system. So you're going to have a repository, which is where kind of your final draft is stored, and your working directory, which is like, your desk. And you can check out things from your repository to your working directory. That's called a checkout. And you can commit things from your working directory to your repository, again called a commit. But I don't want to confuse you guys with all these fancy terminology. I mean, all these words except for working directory really are almost entirely new to us. So let's take a step back. Let's really try and fundamentally and conceptually understand what's going on. So let's just move that to the side here. And let's think about it like a publishing cycle. And for the purposes of this course, we're going to be thinking of it much like writing a book, because some people do actually use Git to write books, to work on chapters and edit things, and you will see a fair amount of books on Git. Not to say, coding is probably definitely what, people actually use it for, but, books are there. So we're thinking of it like a publishing cycle. The repository is like the publisher, right? You're going to send the publisher kind of a nice, good draft of what you've got going. You're not going to send her something full of scratch marks and, red marks and, circles everywhere. You want to send the publisher like, okay, here's a good, solid copy of, here's the progress that I've made. And then your working directory is really your writer's desk. It's kind of where you could have junk everywhere. You could have, scratch marks everywhere. You can be, going off 50 different ideas and trying out new things. The writer's desk is your own personal laboratory, while the publisher is a little more, concrete. It's kind of like, okay, here's where I send all my good final stuff. So we receive things from the publisher. That's going to kind of be our analogy to checkout. And we send things to the publisher from the writer's desk to the publisher. That's kind of our analogy for a commit. But there is a primary difference in Git. Git uses a three-tree architecture system. So what that means is we're still going to have our repository, and we're still going to have our working directory. And a checkout is going to work the same in a repository. You grab from the repository and you move it down to the working directory. But now we're going to add another little kind of column, which is the staging index. And so in order to move from back and forth here, you go from the working directory to the staging index, and that's called an add. And you go from the staging index to the repository. That's called a commit. Again, take a look at this and kind of, a little bit understand it, but let's break it down. Let's make it real simple so, even a kindergartner can understand what's going on here. So again, your repository is like a publisher. It's kind of where your good final copy wants to go. Your working directory is your writer's desk. It's where you're going to screw around and, try out a bunch of stuff, write something and then delete it and then write another thing and then delete it and then, write another thing and hey, that's the right code. And then a receive or a checkout is going to work the same. And a publisher is going to send you, one of your old drafts of, okay, hey, I need chapter 3 back. And your publisher is going to send you chapter 3. So you're going to receive from the publisher. But this staging index, think of it like your outbox. Think of it almost just like a mailbox, okay? When you think you're ready, and you think, oh, hey, I've got a nice draft of my chapter 3 here, I'm going to wrap it up and put it in the mailbox. Well, once it's in the mailbox, the publisher doesn't have it, but it is off your desk. So it's kind of like we think we're ready to send this to the publisher. Now remember, your mailbox, you can think about it again, is still on your property. So if you wanted to go get it from the mailbox and bring it back and say, nah, never mind, I'm not ready, you can do that. So the outbox and the writer's desk are on your property, while the publisher is kind of a separate, foreign, somewhere else where you can't just go and change something. The publisher says, no, you sent me it, it's stuck here. You can add something new to it, but you can't just change what you did. And we'll talk about that in a bit. But an add works the same way. If you add something to the outbox, and then a commit, although a send, goes from the outbox to the publisher. Now, these aren't going to work perfectly throughout this course. Eventually, we're going to move into just referring to this publisher, outbox, and writer desk as the repository, staging index, and working directory. And eventually, their analogies are kind of going to lose their full conceptual taste here, because eventually you're going to go, okay, well, wait a minute, a publisher doesn't do that, Joe. What are you still referring to as a publisher for? So it's not going to work the entire time, but in the beginning, think about it in kind of this context of you're going to send something and blah, blah, blah. We're going to use this example a lot throughout the first couple of videos in this course. So kind of get it in your head and think about it and make sure visually you understand how Git is working.